Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me for a second time William Engdahl. Mr. Engdahl is an award-winning geopolitical analyst, strategic risk consultant, author, professor, and lecturer. And after earning a degree in politics from Princeton University and graduate study in comparative economics at Stockholm University, he worked as an economist and investigative freelance journalist in New York and Europe. And I think that is very, very important because I'd much rather have a freelance guy with me who's free to talk and say what he's discovered than to have someone who's working for a mainstream firm that is not necessarily so free. I don't want to spend too much more time reading his biography. It is at the Voice America Business channel on my page at the Voice America Business channel. So go there, learn more about this man, or go check him out on the internet to learn more about him and all the work that he's done. Thank you so much for joining me again, William.
Thank you, Jay.
Always good to talk to you. I believe that I'm talking to you. You're in Germany again today when we're talking,
Yep.
right?
That's right.
But are you born in the United States?
Yes, I grew up in Texas. I'm very much American.
Oh, and still American citizen, but have been living in Germany for a while. You know, I really would like to have a better sense of what the feelings are in Germany about geopolitics and what's going on, and maybe we'll touch on that because I have a question I want to ask you about something that the Secretary, our Defense Secretary, or Secretary of State, Kerry, recently said about the Iranian agreement, but hopefully we'll get to that. But let me just ask you, as we start out the gods of money, which I'd like to focus on today. You can't serve two masters. You quoted that verse from Matthew 6:24 at the front of your book. But you also mentioned there, you said, this book is a history of the tiny clique of international bankers who created Wall Street and who control it today. And they did the city, or as they did the city of London until the First World War. Can you talk a little bit about the City of London? I mean, who is the City of London? I mean, I've been in London walking around the financial area. Was I in the City of London? Are they not just simply a part of the legal structure of the UK, or are they somebody separate from the UK?
If you trace British history going back to the founding of the Bank of England, the City of London is actually like Vatican City in Rome. It's a city-state inside of the UK, the United Kingdom, inside of Great Britain, inside of London itself as a municipality. The Queen of England has to be granted permission to come into the City of London.
Wow.
This isn't widely spoken about, but this is how it is, and it has. The Bank of England was created as a private central bank. There's a distinction that I want to make between central banks, which I'm sure you've mentioned on your program many times, but central banks and national banks, because the American colonies had a form of banking that Benjamin Franklin played a crucial role in introducing. It was known as colonial scrip, and the money was interest-free. It circulated as a means of exchange between farmers and city dwellers and so forth, exchange for goods, and not as a means of compounding interest and making the population into debt slaves. Mm-hmm. And when the British home country realized what was going on and why the colonies were so prosperous, that they abolished the scrip and demanded a form of taxation. So this. And, of course, the country went into debt, the economy went down, unemployment rose, and everything else that follows when you have this kind of private central banking, usury control of money. So that was the real background to the American Revolution. It's almost not possible to find it in the history books.
Yeah.
And then just to take it a step further, Alexander Hamilton, most Americans think, if they've read anything about the early colonial history, or post-Revolutionary War history, that Hamilton devised the plan for creating the Bank of the United States. Well, what's not generally talked about is that the Bank of the United States was not a public bank, but it was owned by private investors. The leading investor in the bank was the Rothschild family in London. the biggest banker in the world at that time, through surrogates and actually directly. So the battle of the United States, and I go through this in actually going back more or less to the Civil War, for these private banking interests, the international merchant banks, J.P. Morgan and so forth, to literally step by step take over the sovereignty of the United States of America through their introduction of the debt system and the public debt as a main vehicle. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so was this the script system that Benjamin Franklin set up? Was it it did not engage fractional reserve banking then, as our current system does?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so it was an honest system. It was an honest system.
Honest system, and it was the same or similar principle to Abraham Lincoln's greenback that were issued during the Civil War that allowed the North to finance the war costs. And the first thing that was done after the assassination of Lincoln was to repeal the greenbacks and call them in.
That is very interesting. That is very interesting. Very, very important. People should understand that, realize that, because nobody knows that. I mean, very few people know that's what's going on.
Kennedy, I go through this also in my Gods of Money book, but JFK, shortly before he was assassinated by Allen Dulles' friends and Lyndon Johnson's friends and so forth, not only was he winding down the war in Vietnam that hadn't yet become a war, but it was on the brink of it, but he introduced silver certificates of the United States Treasury, not Federal Reserve notes. And he did that in a small quantity, but the implications, David Rockefeller wrote a letter to the editor, I think of the New York Times, it's in the book, then the chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, and he was absolutely foaming at the mouth about this step by Kennedy. So,
and that is actually in your book?
Yes, it's in there.
Okay, and it was Executive Order 11110, I believe it was, that Kennedy issued. And you talked about this the last time you were on the show, about how he issued that. As a matter of fact, it really struck a chord with me because I happen to own one of those $5 notes. I've kept it. Clearly, if I took it to the bank, I could spend it now and probably for $5, but it would have entitled me then to 5 silver dollar coins, which would have been worth an awful lot more.
More than $5, yeah.
Right. And I think you indicated the last time you were on that, in fact, the Treasury, and not the central bank, not the Fed, but the Treasury had issued 10s and 20s as well, silver certificates, but they never were circulated, I guess, when Kennedy was killed. Then was that executive order repealed? Or was it just...
I don't know formally if it was repealed, but the silver certificates were completely called in and stopped, and you never heard anything more of it. So Lyndon Johnson wasn't about to buck Wall Street or the military industry complex.
Right. All right. So this sort of the powers behind the throne, I guess. We've heard that's that term before. I suppose those would be the Rothschilds and people like that actually.
Well, it's a Rockefeller, U.S. and not only the Rothschilds, and they're actually during the 1920s, after World War I, the British and the City of London could not believe, but the British government, that the United States was demanding repayment of the war loans that had allowed London and France, to finance the war against Germany, and that was an attempt by the House of Morgan, which was then the leading Wall Street house, Pierpont Morgan's bank, J.P. Morgan and Son and Company, that they wanted to establish an American gold system in Europe as an imitation of what London did for the previous century. London was bankrupt coming out of the war, and Washington demanded, or the U.S. Treasury, which is Wall Street, demanded that London pay back every penny of its war debts, and France as well. So that became the Versailles German reparations clause that gave Germany sole guilt for World War I, and that they had to not only surrender their naval fleet and their colonies in Africa, and this, that, and the other thing, but they had to agree to pay back these war reparations to Britain and France. And the sum of the war reparations, it took 2 or 3 years to nail down a dollar amount. The sum was equal exactly to what America or the U.S. Treasury and Wall Street were demanding from England and France for their war loans. So that tells you how this debt slavery system works.
So the Treaty of Versailles, essentially, the Britain and France demanded reparations from Germany. We know where that led to the Second World War and the problems inside of Germany. But so let me understand this. So the United States was demanding the repayment of loans, so that Britain and France demanded this repayment from Germany.
From Germany,
so that they could repay the loans to the United States. Essentially, that was being demanded by the Wall Street tycoons, essentially at that time J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, and Rockefeller is a junior player
okay,
then.
So yes, and then as when J.P. Morgan passed away, then the Rockefellers became very prominent, didn't they, in the United States behind the scenes?
Quite so fast. J.P. Morgan passed away in 1913. But his son carried on, and the Morgan partners were enormously powerful. But it was the gold standard that J.P. Morgan established with U.S. government backing in Europe by extending loans, $100 million a pop, to Italy, Mussolini's Italy, fascist Italy, to Germany for the Dawes Plan, reparations plan, to France and other countries. So then they had the gold backing of the dollar to establish an American gold standard to replace the British, because the British, at the beginning of the war, were forced to go off the gold standard. And that really put London at a huge disadvantage. So there was a big power struggle going on. And I characterize the period between 1914 and 1945 as one single period of war to decide who would succeed the British Empire. The British Empire was on its dying legs. It had a Great Depression that lasted 25 years, beginning 1873 up until the 1890s, and never recovered from that. The industry of Britain was just hollowed out, much the same as America today, with the outsourcing, offshore production, and so forth, and disinvestment in infrastructure inside the United States over the last 35 years.
Okay, so that's so then if Germany had prevailed, they would have been held the world's reserve currency then.
I don't know if we would have had several reserve currencies or not. I think the thing that I'm looking at, and it's really quite fascinating, is what would have happened had the Tsar Nicholas II of Russia not been manipulated into making a secret alliance with Britain before World War I. Mm-hmm. A secret alliance with Britain that led to a British, French, Russia triangle to encircle Germany as the rising industrial threat, much the way Washington views, or the neoconservatives view, China today and Russia today in a different sense. And had that not happened, the natural course of events would have brought Germany and Russia much closer together in a positive way. Russia's economy was not in the dregs that we're told in the history books. They had a public banking system virtually up until the outbreak of the Bolshevik Revolution under Tsar Nicholas. And the economy was growing in a very healthy way until the war.
Just a couple of quick questions here that come to mind. One, getting back to the gold standard system that J.P. Morgan imposed on Europe. Again, that was a fractional reserve system, was it not? It wasn't an honest banking system. It wasn't an honest banking system.
All of this, anything that Wall Street does is fractional reserve.
Right. It's really a legalized theft system, isn't it? Without people really understanding it. That you can multiply. Yeah. Yeah.
The banks create fractional reserve is the central bank gives a fraction that they're allowed to loan out as a multiple of the reserves they hold with the central bank. Right. And I think today it's around 11 to 1
Yeah.
So they just create money out of thin air and demand interest for that money from the borrowers, and that's the system. And it just we've seen what it brings, a continuous cycle of boom and depression, unemployment, and so forth. Boom and depression and unemployment.
Yeah, and it's a gigantic Ponzi scheme is what it is, a legalized Ponzi scheme, legalized through the barrel of a gun, essentially.
Yeah, and what I consciously tried to, or consciously set out in the course of writing the book, is how each time there's this boom and collapse that the bankers engineer, they consolidate more power. They decide when the collapse is going to come. They get their money out, and when prices are on the basement, they come in and buy the choice assets for pennies on the dollar, and that's how they built their power, through theft, through corruption, through buying politicians to change the laws, and so forth.
Right. Well, so now we've had a 7-year bull market, at least in U.S. equities.
Yeah.
We've seen some indication. I firmly believe that we're ready for another bear market, a substantial one. And what we can expect is more of the same, probably. These guys are bailing out now. We've seen, a leading technical analyst talk about how the smart money has been coming out of the market in the last year or so, probably. Sucking little guys
in. The high yield market, the junk bond market, the shale oil junk bond.
Sure, absolutely. And then, of course, engineering interest rates that require people to look for yield to try to get some sort of return on interest. So it's just a crime. It goes on and on. Let me ask you this: Russia. You mentioned about Russia wasn't in such bad shape as our history books suggested. What about Russia now? Are they? All we hear here, the propaganda in the U.S. is that we've got Russia on their heels.
Oh no. I was in Russia 4 weeks ago for an extended period of time. I was in Russia in April. I was in Russia in January, which was the peak of the crisis, with the ruble falling 50%, and oil in the basement. It was under $39 a barrel, I think, at that point. And I tell you, you do not see a people in panic. You do not see a people in rage. They are walking down the streets. January is the Russian Christmas. The streets were lighted up in the most beautiful way I've ever seen in a city in the world around Christmas time, and the people were happy, friendly. The times are tight. There's certain things that are not working, but the sanctions have fundamentally backfired on the neoconservatives and the hawks in Washington and Wall Street who designed them. And the ironic thing is, they realized around early January that they were shooting themselves in the foot, but they were risking blowing out the whole $500 billion shale bubble that Wall Street had created over the last 5-6 years. And if that were to blow, the whole financial system in Wall Street could blow with it. And not only that, but they predicated a whole geostrategy on being the world's largest oil exporter, and that was in danger of collapsing. It's collapsing. It
seems to be. Okay, so here's the question for today. We want to find out how much longer this sort of the U.S. dollar can remain as the world's reserve currency. Now, it was built on the petrodollar. I think we're in agreement with that. After Nixon took us off the gold standard in 71, Kissinger goes over to Saudi Arabia and arranges with the oil producers to produce oil or to pay for oil in U.S. dollars. That provided a bid under the dollar, right? That provided, and it's continuing, but now we have an oil price that's half of what it was. Is this system in danger of, are the Wall Street guys, the powers behind the throne here in the U.S. and NATO alliance, in danger of losing the dollar as the world's reserve currency?
Well, it's a little more complicated, Jay. The dollar became the reserve currency in 1944 with Bretton Woods because the Federal Reserve had something like 70% of all monetary gold in the world at that point. So every other currency in Europe was forced to peg itself to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. So the other currencies weren't gold-backed. They were pegged to the dollar. And then when Nixon was forced because the demands on to exchange dollars for gold, which was how the system worked up to 1971, the demands were so great from Germany, from France, and so forth. They didn't want these inflated dollars that were being inflated by budget deficits for the Vietnam War and the Great Society, whatever. And the Federal Reserve didn't have the gold to back it, so they advised Nixon. Paul Volcker was the one who did it at Treasury at that point. Advised Nixon to tear up the Bretton Woods Treaty and tell the world to go take a flight to the moon. So the dollar was backed at that point until 1973 in the oil shock. The dollar was backed by nothing, and it went down, I think, 40% within a matter of a few months. So to stabilize it, and this I detail in my book, Century of War, in great detail. I have the documents to back it up. They had a meeting in Saltsjöbaden outside of Stockholm, Sweden, in May of 1973. Henry Kissinger was among the American invitees. He was Secretary of State. And all the key, David Rockefeller, of course, all the key heads of the oil companies, British and American, and Rothschild was there. And what they talked about, this was a meeting of what's called the Bilderberg Society or Bilderberg Group. They talked about a coming 400% increase in the price of crude oil. And rather than talk about how they could persuade OPEC not to make such an increase that would ruin the world economy and the oil market, they talked about what to do with all the dollars. So this is what saved the dollar, and that's where the petrodollar system came in.
Okay, we only have about a minute left. How long can this last?
Well,
are we in danger of losing it now?
Okay, it can last as long as there is no credible alternative. The Chinese, through the BRICS Bank, the AIIB, its alliance with Russia, and its increase of its gold reserves, is working extremely diligently on building a credible alternative. I think the bust in the Chinese stock market bubble is forcing them to realize they had some flaws in the model, like getting too much into a Wall Street speculation mode, but I'm confident they're sorting that out in a good way.
All right.
And it has to have a credible alternative, and that has to be something with security, military security, and so forth. And that's why there's a war going on from Washington in Ukraine, provoke Russia, and so forth.
Okay, that certainly makes sense to me. We're out of time. I'd love to have you back on to explore this further in the future, if you're willing to come on, William. Sure. Thank you so much for being with us again today. I really enjoy your work, and I want to tell my listeners it's Engdahl, ENGDAHL, .oilgeopolitics.net.
I'm sorry, Jay. I have a new website.
Okay, the best place to go.
William Engdahl, one word, .com. Very simple.
WilliamEngdahl.com. That's ENGDAHL, and we are out of time. WilliamEngdahl.com. Thanks so much for being with me today, William. We look to do it again sometime in the near future. Thank you so much.